All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Time to dive deeper into classical teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment, coming to us from the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. And this has been a fun series so far. In the beginning of the series, we actually skipped back and did the bonus material, which was the most valuable qualities for a spiritual seeker. And in that special bonus chapter, we went through where Dr. David Hawkins shares one of the last lectures that he delivered, which focused on the most valuable qualities for a spiritual seeker, going through things that realizing that salvation and enlightenment are somewhat different goals, and clarifying that it's not a personal you who is seeking enlightenment, but rather a quality of consciousness itself that is the motivator. So very deep spiritual love, spiritual development is not just an accomplishment, but a way of life, and many more wonderful topics like that. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we will be diving into the section more towards the front of the book, as you could see, entitled Higher Levels of Consciousness. And we're reading this for purposes of commentary and expanding the mind, maybe a little entertainment, but hopefully that we can find and create a greater awareness and understanding of not only ourselves, but of our minds and our spirits and our spiritual nature, and of the nature of reality, and maybe even God, so that through that increased awareness, understanding, enlightenment, maybe, we can hopefully increase the quality of our experience. And so with that being said, let us dive in to the section entitled Higher Levels of Consciousness and see what we can learn from the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I love and appreciate each and every one of you that spends time with me and this wonderful wisdom that we go through here on this channel. So hope you are company. Hope it's a beautiful day wherever you are. And let us dive in to the higher levels of consciousness. It begins by saying, quote, "We went on to study various religions and calibrate the levels of movies, books, television shows, and everything represents a greater or a lesser degree of spiritual energy." And so this is referring to calibrating the levels of consciousness, which is what most of this chapter has been about. But if you want to learn that, I got this book linked in the description below. I figured we'd go past the drier points to get to the more spiritual points for us. But if you wanted to learn about calibrating the levels of consciousness, which is a science called applied kinesiology, developed by David R. Hawkins and many others, then you can check that out. But let us continue. The greater the spiritual orientation and the alignment with truth, the higher the calibration. And so we have this calibrated scale of consciousness, the book continues, the greatest usefulness of which is really to say yes, not no, but yes and not yes, which is a key distinction, as we learned earlier in this series. So you would say, quote, "The spiritual teacher is integrous and useful for my life," unquote. And you get a yes or a not yes. Or you might say, "It's too soon. Maybe I should wait with, whatever it is. Maybe I should wait with this one." And it will say yes or not yes. One can use it for guidance, and spiritual students who are really committed to transcending the ego. Remember, we talked a couple weeks ago on Tuesday about going beyond the ego in this philosophy of devotional non-duality that David Hawkins created. But transcending the ego and reaching the higher spiritual states that have found it quite useful. And so that state we call enlightenment occurs at a level calibrated at 600. When a person goes into 600, they go into the levels of love. First conditional love, then unconditional love. Then many become interested in spiritual pathways and meditation and spiritual techniques, and they begin to pursue them with a greater and greater dedication. And I'm sure if you have been on this path in your life, as I have, and I'm guessing you are if you're here watching this video, then I'm sure you have experienced this for yourself as well. When you can get to this place of love, and somebody asked me one time, a long time ago, when I was talking about the levels of consciousness back in the beginning of this channel, 5, 6 years ago, was that how do you increase or level up, so to speak, and get to a higher level of consciousness? And after thinking about it for a while, I came to the understanding, now, this may, but I came to the understanding that it's a lot like satori, which is a word that means instant enlightenment, or a moment of enlightenment, an instance of enlightenment, rather than a scale of leveling up from unenlightened to enlightened. We can have these moments within any time of our experience and then drop back down to very normal ego existence. But I'm thinking that would be very similar to what is being described here. When a person goes into 600, that doesn't mean that you're forever locked. You're now level 600. This can vary, but depending on our emotional and mental states. And so when a person goes into 600, they go into the levels of love, first conditional, then unconditional. Then many become interested in spiritual pathways and meditation and spiritual techniques, and they begin to pursue them with greater and greater dedication. As they do, they begin to experience life in a transformative, completely different context. And this is part of the reason that I'm so, enthralled with this kind of information and this kind of content, is because that is just the case. Is once you begin to change your thoughts, you change your life. Once you begin to change the way you look at things, the things that you look at, even though they look the same to other people, begin to change drastically for you. And like you said, as you do this, we begin to experience a life that is transformed from the kind of life that we experienced before, because it's coming from a completely different perspective or context, with an increased awareness and understanding. Now, back to what the book says. In the high 500s, which are quite amazing, one is overcome by the sheer beauty of everything. The only reality that exists is love. There's only love, and all you see is love. All you experience is love and beauty. Love, beauty, and harmony. And the miraculous begin to happen spontaneously, and eventually they become continuous. A lot of people who've done A Course in Miracles, which is a book that Wayne Dyer references often in his lectures, David Hawkins referencing it here, a lot of people who've done A Course in Miracles go into that transformative state, he says. You drive into the city and you think of a parking space. See, this is the classic Wayne Dyer one. You drive into the city, you think of a parking space, and as you get there, there's a parking space waiting right in front of you. Now, how many people do you know that, go into life using this analogy, expecting the worst? Like, oh, there's never going to be a place to park at the front. That's why I always just park at the back. I personally park at the back because I don't mind walking, a little extra distance, which is just fine. But it's this kind of philosophy of expecting the worst, or transforming your thoughts and your vibration, your level of consciousness, your frequency, your harmony, to where you can align in this way. This is kind of getting into the point of manifesting. However, let's continue. You drive into the city and you think of a parking space, and as you get there, there's a parking space waiting right in front of you. In fact, it's the one and only parking space. And just as you pull up, a car pulls out, like they were waiting for you to let you in. When this first begins to happen, you sort of remark about it like, oh, wow. After a while, you begin to experience that that's the way life is. It's the continuous miraculous. The miraculous is ongoing and continuous, but any of us can obviously see how it would be so easy to cancel out with our thoughts the possibility of staying in these higher levels of consciousness that can allow a different experience of life, because as we all know, it is no easy task. And so that's once again why we are here. Although David Hawkins would argue and say it is the easiest task. But in this state, everybody becomes stunningly beautiful and handsome. When you are in this love state of the 500s, below 600, which is bliss and enlightenment, however, still a miraculous state to remain in if you can. And so it's fascinating. Everybody becomes stunningly beautiful and handsome. You're in love with reality. This isn't about falling in love. You're in love with everything and everyone all the time. And you can only see the beauty and perfection of everything. Now, isn't this a goal worth trying to arrive at? I was about to say striving for, but as we've reminded ourselves constantly that it is very important to stop striving so much and begin arriving and allowing and aligning. However, this is very fascinating. And you can only see the beauty and perfection of everything. And then the state may reach in the very high 500s what is sometimes described as ecstasy, or a very high level of bliss. One can start going into states of indescribable bliss, like the opening of a brilliance within one's mind, consciousness, within our thoughts, and how we experience life. The ecstasy is continuous. At that point, you can't function in the world anymore. As Ramakrishna described it. That is hilarious. You get so blissed out, you can like almost no longer function in reality, as Ramakrishna described it. I remember going through it myself, Dr. David Hawkins says, forgetting about functioning in the world. You can dance in an expression of exquisite ecstasy at the joy of one's existence, but you can barely function. And then one has to surrender that to God. So each step along the way of the levels of consciousness is surrendering, being able to let go and release, I'll put it, and go with the flow, allowing, being able to surrender whatever is presenting itself to God. Finally, even in the state of ecstasy, one has to surrender that state to God, and then one hits level 600. Fascinating. I've never heard him describe this process of going from 500 to 600, or from this very high level of love and appreciation for everything into enlightenment being level 600. And when one hits level 600, Dr. Hawkins says, which is a state of infinite silence, bliss, and a profound peace beyond all understanding. That would be nice. That would be nice. The peace of God is beyond psychological peace. And that's probably what so much of us are trying to get an eternal lock on, is this psychological or emotional peace. However, this peace is beyond that. It's a different dimension. And in that state, you don't have to eat, breathe, or even function. One just purely blisses out, almost like you are outside of time. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen in India some of the meditators that attempt or do reach this state, and they would seem like they've been sitting for months at a time. It's a very interesting thing to observe. People, will tend to them in certain ways, and it's It's very interesting how it's understood and respected and, thought about totally different in many different cultures and spiritual traditions. However, it's a different dimension. One blisses out outside of time. Satchitananda, it's called classically. Interesting. So that state is called Satchit Ananda. And if things are favorable, the body will eventually get fed, move up, walk around, and survive. If the conditions are not favorable to that circumstance, which is frankly irrelevant, however, then the body just topples over eventually. So about 50% of the people who go into a latent state like that, frankly, pop back out because they can't stay. They leave, it says. The one awareness that is quite obvious in that state is that you have permission to leave. You can leave right now. In fact, you can stop reading, you can stop watching. You have permission, ladies and gentlemen. This is important for us to understand in our lives, is that we choose. And so often we give our control away saying that, oh, I didn't, this is beyond my choice. But even the times when we have to choose between two things that we don't want to do, it is still a choice. And so that's important to recognize. You have permission. So what's going to keep the body going, he asks. Well, you see, there are no needs and no wants. Everything is complete and total. That is one of my more favorite sentiments, that you are complete and whole in each moment. Everything is complete and total. And so the bliss of the state is that everything is complete. So from that moment on, if the body survives, you don't ever really need anything anymore. People ask, what do you want? I don't want anything. What do you need? Well, I don't need anything. Certain things would be nice, but I don't need them. And so one is then independent of the world. What the world says or does is really quite irrelevant at that point. It's impossible to function in this state. So it's important to remember the old 10 bulls of Zen philosophy, I believe it, or Buddhist philosophy, something like that. But it was the story that was written, and at first there was 9 bulls, and it was like the quest to get to enlightenment. And you go through all these stages, and at the end, you're in this blissed out, ineffable, non-functionable state that a lot of people refer to as the stone Buddha or the statue Buddha, who, is so blissed out that no longer exists or functions in the material world and is gone to us, so to speak. However, the 10th bull was a later edition, and it taught that even though we can reach this state, even more powerful and important would be able to reach this state and then come back and use this new awareness and go throughout life helping others with this new perspective that you have reached, instead of just remaining the non-existent, non-functioning stone Buddha. Now let's see what David Hawkins says about that in the last couple sentences here of that section entitled Higher Levels of Consciousness, and then we'll dive into chapter 3 entitled Spiritual Consciousness and do a little bit introduction into that chapter. So he says, and so one then is independent of the world. What the world says or does becomes irrelevant, and at that point it is impossible to function in that state. What happens if you survive, he says, is most people leave. They pack up everything and say goodbye and leave. This is what I did. He says, I left the biggest practice in the country and a very elite lifestyle. And he says, I drove to a small town. In the refrigerator, there'd be a banana, 2 Pepsis, a piece of cheese, and that was fine. What more do you need? Well, I would recommend a more healthy option than the Pepsis. However, you get the point, ladies and gentlemen. Very fascinating. Now, Chapter 3, once again, from the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins, Classical Teachings on Spiritual Truth and Enlightenment. Spiritual consciousness. And that's what this is almost always about, is how our consciousness relates to our spirituality. So now that we have a clearer understanding, and like I said, if you want to get the book for yourself and reread the front portion of chapter 2 there that goes through getting started on how to do this process of muscle testing and calibrating consciousness levels, then you can check that out. I have that in the description below. Now, but he says, now that we have a clear understanding of how to calibrate the spiritual truth and the maps of consciousness, you are ready to begin elevating your spiritual level of consciousness to its highest potential. In this chapter, David Hawkins will give us several ideas for doing just that, and they include relinquishing the quest for perfection, remember the striving, and following evolved spiritual values rather than dogmatic religious doctrines. Huge important point there, and that's part of the reason I do this channel, is I found that spiritual philosophy goes far beyond the dogmatic religious doctrines that keep all of those spiritual philosophies and the wisdom of the ages separated and categorized and compartmentalized so that we can never come together with a firm understanding to create a planet of enlightened men and women, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they include relinquishing the quest for perfection, following evolved spiritual values rather than dogmatic religious doctrines, and being grateful, introspective, and compassionate. And it's very fascinating. These are all tenets that are also taught in the Tao Te Ching, in Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, in the Corpus Hermeticum, in the Hermetica, talking about ancient Egyptian spiritual philosophy from Thoth, the Egyptian sage god, or Hermes Trismegistus. But that's the point, is that this spiritual philosophy goes beyond, and it can teach us to live in a new way, which takes much diligence and practice and devotion and dedication to that as a lifestyle, because even the masters have reminded us how easy it is for us to be forgetful. However, chapter 3 begins by David Hawkins saying, quote, "You are not limited by this world, or even definable, measurable, and visible. By looking at the levels of consciousness on the chart, you can tell what your spiritual worth is. You want to transcend the world, that is, to be in it, but not of it, not limited by it." That, the famous quote by the master from Nazareth is, you want to be in the world but not of it, and then David Hawkins as it not limited by it. To be limited by it is to buy all of its programs, to indoctrinate yourself with all of these programs. To buy all of its programs, you're going to have to run around and buy everything that's for sale. Because if you're successful, you'll have new carpets and you'll have a new house, and you can't possibly meet all the definitions of quote unquote making it, or worldly physical success, as we call it in this world. You should have more friends. You should be more handsome. You should be 6 feet tall. All of these things that we, the self-repudiation, the self-depreciation needs to be eliminated. There's always something you can find fault with when it comes to yourself, and you'll never be satisfied. So the thing is to be happy with what you are at the moment, and also see that you are an evolving human being. Therefore, you don't have to be perfect, because you're not required to be perfect. I mean, think about this, really. This is very important. This really gave me a new sense of comfort and peace in life when I firmly got this in my head. And I think this is something that we have to really pound it into ourselves until we live from this perspective, is that, everybody out here, even though some people may look like they're way better at life than you are, way more successful in all of these things, they suck too. Like, they might not be good at tennis, or, they might not be a good reader or whatever it be. I'm like, and you may be good at some of those things, or, you may be great at math, but suck at something else, and you're continually judging yourself for the thing that you're not good at. We need to dive into our strengths, ladies and gentlemen, and realize that everybody sucks. So if everybody sucks, then that means everybody's great. So it's up to you how you want to look at it. I'm going to read this again, so hopefully we can discover this for ourselves. There is always something we can find fault with when it comes to ourselves, and we will never be satisfied. So the thing we have to do, most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, is to be happy with what we are in each moment, and realize that perfection is a subjective perspective. For someone to judge someone else does not define the other person. It only defines the person doing the judging as someone who needs to judge. The other person is probably blissfully unaware of your judgments and is not affected at all. However, you are affecting yourself in this practice of judging someone or even yourself. And so, the old sentiment, if you do not have love, you cannot give it away. So if you don't love yourself, how are you going to expect, the sentiment. So the thing is to be happy with what you are at the moment, and also see that we are an evolving human being. And so because everybody else is not perfect either, therefore you don't have to be perfect, because we are not required to be perfect. This is our ego trying to not let us experience bliss in life. And, it's the survival instinctual programming that we talked about. That is the ego, for what we talked about a couple weeks ago. You'll find that video, a few videos down on my channel if you want to check it out. It's called What is the Ego? And so we are only expected to make the best possible use that we can of the advantages here, to learn and to grow, and most importantly, to support others in that process, and support yourself as well, and to be loving and forgiving, which is a reminder we all need, often, daily, multiple times, because we can get in our own minds and, get stuck in our ego. Oh, I want it this way. I'm angry. It should be that way. And, that's something I've been dealing with lately. That's why I love doing this. And hopefully you're getting value as much as I am, ladies and gentlemen. Be sure to smash the like button and share this with somebody who is like-minded. That helps support the work that we do here on this channel. And it means so much to me, once again, that you would be here seeking after the wisdom of spiritual consciousness and Dr. David R. Hawkins. So we are only expected to make the best possible use of the abilities that we do have. So like I said, if you're, whatever qualities that is your strengths, dive into those, because those are your gifts, what you have to offer to this world, rather than being so, self-defeating and, just destroying yourself through your thoughts because you think you're no good. It's a weird thing that we have to tend to focus on that when it's debilitating. It doesn't allow us to once again share that gift and those advantages that we do have, that it's different for each of us, which is important. If we all had wonderful characteristics and were great at everything, then there wouldn't be this beautiful, symposium and symphony of different wonderful And, this experience that we have here in life that is so many different, as Bill Hicks put it, thrills and chills and ups and downs and funny colors, and goes round. But to learn and to grow and to support others and to be loving and forgiving is something that we need to practice. And you're doing all that you can as a human being when we are trying to do those things. So remember, you don't have to be perfect, ladies and gentlemen. Becoming a spiritual seeker, easy for me to say. Becoming a spiritual seeker. We'll get started in this section just a little bit, and then we'll leave it for a tease for next week, because this is going to be probably the most powerful next couple sections that we are going to go through. And I think it will be important to separate them into their own discussions, because we're going to be talking about the sound of God is silence. Remember, he mentioned silence earlier, in that ineffable state. Becoming the witness, which is, I think, one of the most important philosophical, psychological understandings, and surrendering to the small self. All of that is about becoming introspective and beginning to know yourself and observing your thoughts. I was just talking with my sister a few days ago about becoming the observer. There's very, very few people that become the noticer of the thoughts that are, popping into your head. It's like this train that's going by, and every one of the cars is a different thought. And we sometimes latch on to these thoughts that are flowing by and take responsibility for them. And we need to be able to recognize, oh, wait a minute. Why am I having this thought? Becoming the witness. And this begins to change a lot for a lot of people. Becoming a spiritual seeker. Dr. David Hawkins says there are fewer religionists and more spiritually evolved people. More people who call themselves spiritual rather than religious. This is because of the downside of religion. Historically, every religion has had historical events that would disqualify it hypothetically. How can they have made such a mistake? How can I believe a church that believed in that or made that mistake? But what goes on is people will call themselves spiritual. That's the most common pattern in today's world. Very fascinating. It makes me wonder when this book was written and what he's referencing, the time frame he's referencing there, ladies and gentlemen, because I think we've gone much further. First edition, May 2022, can't be that recent. 2020, so there's experts. So this is wow. I had no clue how new this book was. But excerpts are from Healing and Recovery, 2009, used with permission of author and publisher. An excerpt from Discovery of the Presence of God, Devotional Non-Duality, 2007. And the excerpts from The Map of Consciousness Explained in 2020. So they pulled different things from different books of Dr. David R. Hawkins to create this wonderful collection that we've been going through. So it makes me wonder what that time frame that came from. However, I'm guessing 10, 15 years ago, which would apply to almost any time, you could say. However, these people now that tend to be less religious and have seen the faults of the dogmatic, doctrine-based indoctrination, fear and guilt control matrix is what I like to call it. It's like, you're terrible. We have your only solution, so come to us. That's a trap, if you ask me. However, if it works as a springboard to give you a spiritual foundation to where you become a spiritual seeker, which is what we are talking about here, becoming a spiritual seeker, then that is what happened to me, and that's just fine, because we are here now. And we are here. Just think of the time, ladies and gentlemen. So This is fascinating. That's the most common pattern in today's world, he says. They begin to follow spiritual values and learn from spiritual teachers, alive or historical. I would say more often historical. Most spiritual teachers have considerable followings of people who are interested in evolving and growing, maturing spiritually in their levels of consciousness. And they may stay there with one teacher, or they may go to a number of teachers. There was a period of time of being a spiritual seeker where you went to lots of lectures by all different kinds of spiritual teachers. For me, it was on YouTube. Started with Jeffrey Doherty and Wayne Steiger, who opened up the possibility to think about what is the spirit, what is the soul. And after I went through a lot of fear leading up to 2012 and the end of the world, you kind of begin to come to terms with your own reality and mortality. And you have to learn to begin to be able to appreciate life as much as you can, with the perspective and awareness that we are spiritual beings having a temporary human experience rather than human beings every now and then having a temporary spiritual experience. And so each one of these, we go through these different pathways. Something valuable we pick up from each one of these. So for me, then it led to Alan Watts. And then I found Wayne Dyer. And then, Wayne Dyer led to, then I found Dr. David R. Hawkins, and I read Power versus Force and the Eye of the Eye and half of Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. But then I started reading about the ego and then reincarnation, and you just start going into all of these. And it's just so fun once you get a thirst for knowledge. You can never get enough, ladies and gentlemen. And so most spiritual teachers, we begin to follow spiritual values after this pattern. And each one of these different teachers or, things that we come across has something valuable that we can pick up from them. Like Diamond says, are you picking up what is being put down here? Hopefully. I've always liked the sentiment that, at 37 minutes and 26 seconds into a 2-hour video can be the most important life-changing 2 sentences in your life. But a lot of people don't have the train of thought or the time, or the whatever you want to call that, to make it 37 minutes into a 2-hour video because they're just like, I just don't want to commit. And I'm telling you, when we can commit and dedicate our time to this pursuit, it pays off in the most miraculous ways, unexplicable most times. And so each one has something valuable that you can pick up from them. Techniques, possibly, or just ways of looking at things that are different than the way you've seen things before, or a blind spot that you possibly weren't even aware you had until you heard a lecture on it. So you seek, you become a spiritual seeker. In a way, spiritual really means seeking. See, with religion, you found the answer. That's this church or this denomination or, whatever, this specific, and that's the answer. It's like, and then we will give you what you need. Do not depend on yourself. But the opposite is entirely true. Depend on yourself. Be your own guru. Be your own guide. And be your own master. And master your own ascension? How did he used to say it? Anyways. Ask questions, ladies and gentlemen, and more importantly, question answers. And we will find that that is the answer. And so now you just have to apply it to yourself. This spiritual person who says, I'm spiritual but not religious, usually becomes a seeker and wants to learn more and ask more questions and discover within themselves And that's when you truly got it, ladies and gentlemen, is when you're no longer reaching outside of yourself, but when you've got it here, and then it follows you wherever you go, and you can continue to grow, keep going, keep growing. And so that person usually becomes a spiritual seeker. They go to various lectures, they attend meetings and retreats, and they listen to all different kinds of teachers, which is why I'm reading this and maybe why you're here on this video. So once again, I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And they learn something from each one, as I do. Each spiritual teacher has something. And what they have may be nonverbal. It may not even be a word. The subtle enthusiasm they have for certain concepts. And then the seeker may even pick up that enthusiasm. So each teacher has something to share and something that can be learned, ladies and gentlemen. Most of David Hawkins' own audiences listen to a number of different speakers. Each of these teachers may be a suitable guide at various points and periods of your life. We all go through different phases. And so at certain times when going on spiritual retreats is extremely valuable. And then there are other times when that's just a way of avoiding the responsibilities of life. So you really had a lot you should have done at home this weekend. Instead, you went on a retreat to Camp Baba. Well, when you get home, the lawn still hasn't been mowed. The kids are still crying. You didn't help with the kids with their homework. So when you're running away, you're really doing it for an advantage. Most of these spiritual things serve a purpose at certain periods of our lives. He says, I've noticed most people change their pattern as they go through life. And if you're going to evolve, then you must do this. Other people just develop a perfect pattern and stay with that. They stay with that for a lifetime. And so I'm going to go back to that point there that I thought was the most important to finish with, is that when we go beyond and we become the spiritual seeker, which is what this has been about, we begin to be the people, the kind of person that says, I am spiritual, not religious. And usually when we do that, we become a seeker for the wisdom and the wisdom of the ages, ladies and gentlemen. And we find that in this seeking, that each spiritual teacher has something to offer for us along our journey, and it will be something unique for each of us. So if you got something unique out of this, leave that in the comments below. And I'm sure other people would love to hear what you got out of this. I would love to hear it for certain. But even things so subtle we can pick up as such, and what they have may even be, these teachers, a nonverbal, subtle enthusiasm for certain concepts and etc. And I'll leave it with what this little fortune I got sitting here. I've read this before, but this goes perfect with that. A master can act without doing anything, teach without a word. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a boom to knowledge. That is a boom to wisdom. The wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins and classical teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment. And that was a fantastic little reading and video, ladies and gentlemen. And we began getting into spiritual consciousness, higher levels of consciousness, and becoming a spiritual seeker. And so next week on Tuesday, we will continue surrendering to the small self, talking about fulfillment and the significance of self-reflection. Very fascinating. Relinquishing the personal will, becoming the witness. The sound of God is silence. Lifting the consciousness level of all mankind. The more you are aligned, it says, with spiritual reality, integrity, truth, and universal love, the more profoundly you are affecting the world without having to do anything. And isn't that a powerful thought? And we'll leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. we'll leave it there. I want to say I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being here. Be sure to expand the description and get this book for yourself so you can put it on your shelf and follow along in future episodes, or just have it for personal reference. I like to have physical books because if the power ever goes out for a short amount of time, I mean, if it's a long amount of time, then we won't be worried about what kind of books we're reading. But I mean, like, it'd be good to have something tangible to give you a little bit of entertainment and maybe even help you feel a little better during times of stress and struggle, because we all go through times like that in life. And so it's important to have something that we can come back to make us feel better and help us to have that new awareness that we're seeking to achieve. Remember, seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of reality and of ourselves. And remember that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way, so that when we can create the ability within ourselves to bring that to life, same with enlightenment, is that all the things that we've been striving for and telling ourselves, oh, I'll only be enlightened when I get there, or I'll only be happy when I have this much money, or that kind of, all of that becomes irrelevant, because then we already are there. And hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. Once again, I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much again. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, diving deeper into Hermetics and the Corpus Hermeticum, and learning about the lost wisdom of the pharaohs and the wisdom of the ancient Egyptian sage god, Thoth, also known as Hermes Trismegistus. All right. Love you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you tomorrow on Wednesday Wisdom. Be the change that you want to see. Be the example that you want to set. No, 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 no.